interrupt your regularly scheduled programming to bring you the latest episode of Across the Board. Effects of listening to this podcast may include being educated on a random topic, shock, hysterical laughter, and an overwhelming feeling of wanting to subscribe to future episodes. This episode will start momentarily.
Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and
Hello,
welcome
hello.
to episode 25.
25 already, huh?
That is kind of crazy.
Wow.
That means that we've been doing this for over 6 months.
Yeah.
It seems like just yesterday I was looking for microphones.
And then here we are.
6 months later,
Yeah.
still
Dude, that 6 months flew by.
no followers.
We have followers.
We have 6.
Okay,
6
that's
in
fine.
6 months.
And thank you for those 6 followers, to those 6 followers.
Yeah, shout out to our friends and family. All right. I'm sure maybe we'll catch a few with this one.
What are we talking about today?
Talking about the Titanic.
Ooh, okay.
So, no joke, I have been fascinated with the story of the Titanic since I was a child. Like, since I first heard about it, I'm like, okay, this is crazy. Like,
Right.
the fact that this ship, all those years ago, like, just the grandiose freaking stature of this thing, the fact
luxury,
that it was huge,
like,
it
yeah.
was, and it was supposedly unsinkable. And as we all know, that did not hold to be
That
true.
didn't go over very well, unfortunately.
But yeah, and it's you know, the whole story of it is just kind of crazy. Like, where it ended up, how deep it was, the fact that they didn't discover the shipwreck until 1985.
Took them that long?
It took them that long. That thing was just sitting at the bottom of the ocean that long
Did
before.
they? I guess maybe they didn't have the technology to
They
be able
didn't,
to.
yeah.
So that makes
Like,
sense.
where
I mean,
it sunk was, I mean, even by today's standards, is super deep, so it's like
Yeah.
hard to get to. And that kind of also, I think, fuels some of the conspiracy theories that it was like, oh, they purposely sunk it there, whoever they is,
yeah.
because it was so deep, and they assumed that nobody would be able to get to it. But
Yeah.
you know, obviously a bunch of bullshit.
Leave it to tech advances to be able to do that.
Well, and the crazy part is it's getting more and more advanced every day. Like,
Right.
there is a there's actually a documentary, as I was just doing research for this, that I just heard about, that came out a couple months ago, from National Geographic.
Okay.
And so they went down there a couple of years back with whatever, like, robotic rover thing, and they have taken over 700,000 high definition images of the Titanic.
Oh, wow. I would love to see that.
And they've basically recreated the entire, so they have a digital recreation of the entire shipwreck. Like, every last bit of it has been captured in high definition detail, along with 4K video.
I wonder if we can watch that.
Why couldn't we watch it?
Let's watch it.
Yeah, of course we can watch it.
I really want to see it.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting that, I mean, obviously they probably could have tried doing this before, but underwater cameras weren't that advanced and stuff. But now they're to the point where they're able to recreate the entire thing, and apparently because part of the problem is that it's deteriorating.
Yeah.
Wow, deteriorating as we speak. Like,
Yeah.
just obviously it's been sitting in salt water for the last 100+ years, so. You know, they wanted to capture whatever they can as it sits now, so that
They still have the opportunity.
they still
to
have
do
the
that.
opportunity to kind of like piece together the story as much as possible.
Absolutely.
They basically know what happened, but I think that there's still a few unanswered questions as to, like, the timeline.
I mean, I think there will always be, besides the timeline, there's always going to be unanswered questions about that. You know, you
I
can't.
mean, about anything though.
Yeah, of course.
Like a plane crash from 2 years ago, people are still like, well, how did this part of it happen? It's like nobody can really
Yeah.
100% tell you the exact events unless they were there. So anyway, broke this up into a couple parts.
Okay.
Part 1 and 2 are going to be kind of mundane, but part 3 will be interesting, and you'll see why. So a lot of this is just written down. I can't remember facts and stuff. So the Titanic construction began in 1909, completed about 3 years later. Actually, it was launched 2 years later. So yeah, it was 3 years until construction was complete. So obviously they'll launch the ship once the hull and the structure is built, but they still got to build out the interior of it.
Okay.
So that was another year. So yeah, it took 3 years for it to be completed. Fitting out was completed on April 2nd, and its maiden voyage was April 10th.
Okay.
In 1912,
Mm-hmm.
the cost was $7.5 million,
Wow.
which equates to about $215 million today.
Wow.
Well, but hold on. And remember, this was like super luxury, super opulent, right? So I love ChatGPT. So if any of this information is incorrect, blame ChatGPT. It's not me. I asked ChatGPT to compare it to something of similar size, a modern ship, and how much that would cost. According to ChatGPT, a similar capacity passenger vessel, the MS Rotterdam, cost about $500 million to complete.
Same size.
Well, it's a little bit
Roughly.
longer. It's not.
So
it's same capacity.
Double the price. More than double the price.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't know if that's just because now we got all these electronics and stuff to deal with, or maybe it's a little because I
I think it's a combination of everything.
It is.
Parts are so expensive, and
labor and
electronics,
stuff. Yeah.
labor. How many people you're going to need, and
Because I mean, even if
probably permits and things like that too. I don't know if back then they had things like that, but
I mean, there's definitely inspections as it
Yeah.
goes and stuff like that. But that's the thing is you don't you got to also account for the fact that even though we're putting more electronics and stuff into a ship today, also the stuff that they were putting into it back then was just more expensive. Like it wasn't as easy to build back then as it is today.
yeah,
So those costs were higher,
yeah.
even though they didn't have the cost of like the electronics and all that.
Yeah.
So anyway, so the Titanic, the boring numbers, 882 feet long, 175 feet tall from the very bottom of the hull, the keel, to the top of the smokestacks, 92 feet wide. So it was a good sized ship.
Yeah.
Top speed was 26.5 miles an hour.
Okay.
So 23 knots.
Okay.
And that comes in it becomes relevant in a few minutes. So the total passenger and crew on board the Titanic, 2,224. 900 of those were crew members.
Oh wow.
So, and obviously it's not all just like people like waiting on people, but from the engineers to the people in the boiler rooms to whatever. So
you had 1,300 passengers roughly.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the total lifeboat capacity for those 2,200 people was
Wasn't it like
about
half?
1,178.
I thought it was like half.
That's right there. That's right about
Okay.
half. 2,200.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're thinking of the 900 number.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Why would they do that?
because it was cheaper.
You can't go cheap with safety.
You got to remember too, though, that they thought this was an unsinkable ship. They're
People
like
think a lot of
lifeboats.
things,
But you know what I mean, though, is like they lifeboats to them were like, oh, we're not even ever gonna need these, so just cut out a few because A, it's cheaper, and B, it looks better without all these lifeboats sitting on the deck.
they were sadly mistaken. That's for sure.
Well, and so the Titanic was to a certain degree, like I guess sink resistant, if that makes sense. So it could have taken damage to 4 of its watertight compartments and not sank.
Yeah.
The iceberg gashed the hull across 6 of the compartments.
That's why they filled up one after the other, right?
Well, that happened after the initial 6. So the initial 6 compartments, that's something else actually. So the initial 6 compartments that were gashed filled with water. And then what happened was as the front of the ship started to kind of just drop its nose because it got heavy, the water spilled over the top of those watertight compartments into the next. And realistically, that should have never happened. The top of those watertight compartments should have been the deck of the ship.
Right.
So it should have never gotten to the point where it should have been the only way to get water into the next watertight compartment should have been if the entire top, exposed deck of the ship was actually underwater.
Okay.
So it was a little cost savings, but again, they used they used what information they had.
Yeah.
You know, engineering obviously has come a long way in the last 100 years. So we will just really quickly talk about what actually happened
Okay.
before we get into the fun stuff. So at about 9 o'clock, they start getting iceberg warnings. They're sailing through the Atlantic. And there's about 9 o'clock on April 14th, they start getting iceberg warnings from other ships that are in the area.
Sorry to deter, but where did it leave from?
I had this information.
Because I know it's
I
going
think it was Ireland.
It was going into New York.
Yeah,
right?
so
Yeah.
if I'm not mistaken, it made a stop in France and then went to Ireland
Okay.
or vice versa and then
Gotcha.
headed out
Okay.
to New York. So they made a couple of stops to pick up people, cargo,
Yeah, yeah,
whatever. So yeah, as it's sailing, oh, sorry, I misread that. It says 9 a.m. to 9:40 p.m. So all day long,
They were
they've been
getting these
iceberg
warnings.
warnings.
Okay.
So other ships are via telegraph are notifying them, hey, there's icebergs in the area.
12 hours of warnings.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it says that wireless operators, the guys that were working the telegraphs, because things were so crazy, some of those warnings never even made it to the bridge to the captain. So he might have gotten a couple of them. He didn't get all of them.
All of them.
So obviously, you know, and we could play this what if game all
Yeah.
day. If the captain did get, you know, 10 warnings versus 2 or 3 or how many ever he did get, maybe he would have said, okay, this must be serious. Maybe we should slow down or whatever. We don't know. At 11:40 p.m. is when they spot the iceberg that they hit.
Yeah.
They ring the bells, they call the bridge, and so, you know, they
Try to steer away
order
from it.
the hard starboard and full astern, so reverse the engines.
Right.
Obviously, it's a big ship. It's moving. This I left it out here. It was moving at 21 knots, so 24 miles an hour,
Almost
right at its
max,
top
yeah.
speed.
Mhm.
Yeah. So for a ship that big, and I mean, obviously, with anything in the water, you know, you're basically at the mercy of the water and
Yeah.
how quickly you slow down. But
Because-
something that big,
Didn't the captain also like tell them to, you know, to make it go faster?
at some point they did, and
Right.
so there's actually debate on that. They think that because the designer, if I'm not mistaken, it was either it was the designer of the ship that was on board, and there's this whole like thing that he talked the captain into going faster and saying like,
They wanted to like save a day or something
yeah,
like that.
like oh, let's show them the speed of the Titanic, but they're saying that there's actually no evidence to support that.
Okay.
That conversation could have happened, but we don't know if that was true.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing that says, you know, the captain's log doesn't say, oh, at the behest of whatever.
Yeah. Right.
We're increasing
Behest.
speed. So it could have been.
Okay.
Who knows? So anyway, so 11:40, they try to avoid the iceberg. They can't. The Titanic impacts this iceberg. The impact lasts about 6.5 seconds before it's able to break away from, you know, through the turn and break away from it. So it gashes the entire side of the ship, or part of the side of the ship, goes through 6 of the watertight compartments. Water starts gushing in, obviously. So they, at midnight, so 20 minutes later, they assess the damage and they're like, okay, we got 2 to 3 hours. That's all they can do. They start sending out distress calls with telegraph and, you know, to neighboring ships and whoever's within
Okay.
range, sending out SOS signals. At 12:15, it says water reaches below deck compartments. So people down in steerage, second, third class, whatever, they activate pumps to try to pump the water out. It's coming in faster than they could pump it out, obviously. They start preparing lifeboats, but they haven't started evacuating yet.
Okay.
At 12:30, so 30 minutes after this impact, the crew starts going around to the first class passengers. And they're, and the way this is worded basically suggests there was no panic. They're knocking on the doors. They're like, hey, sorry to bother you. We know it's kind of late, but why don't you dress warm and meet us up on the decks just as a precaution. Everything's fine, but just in case.
Right.
Still not telling them that this fucker's going down. And they knew it at this point. I don't know if the crew did that was waking the people, but the captain did.
Yeah.
The engineers, everybody knew this was happening. Third class passengers are still not informed.
Made aware. Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, and this is, obviously the movie has to come up, where they show the locked gates from the lower classes.
Yes.
Yeah, they actually were locked.
That is insane.
Yeah. So 12:45, 45 minutes after, or actually about an hour after the impact at this point, they start launching the first of the lifeboats. Lifeboat number 7 gets launched. The lifeboat has a capacity of 65 people. Only 28 people were on that lifeboat.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
What were they thinking?
I don't know.
And who was making these decisions? Like,
I think
what's wrong with you?
I think part of it was panic, but I also think that there was...
Okay, but panic, I understand. It's 28 people in a 65 capacity boat.
I mean,
lifeboat.
it could have been that maybe they mishandled it and dropped it too early, or something happened, or who knows? Maybe it was like it was depicted in the movie, where it was like, drop this lifeboat, I'm getting out of here, So who knows? But so at this point, their priorities to women and children. They're still sending out these SOS signals. By 1 a.m., they fire the first of the distress rockets, the flares. So the SS Californian actually saw the distress flares go up. They didn't realize that there was a Titanic sinking.
Oh.
They didn't know that that's what it was about. So they just kind of, okay, we see a flare, but nothing to be worried about.
I mean, isn't a flare a call for distress? Like,
well, they fired
typically?
white flares, which I'm not sure if a white flare is a distress signal. I thought red was the universal, but I mean that's also 100 years ago, so maybe things were different. Maybe they thought it was like a celebration kind of thing. Maybe they thought they were setting off like fireworks. I don't know. So lower decks start flooding by this point at 1 a.m. So second and third class sections are starting to flood. People are starting to panic. They're trying to get out and up above deck, and you have crew members
locking them in,
locked gates, and blocking the stairwells, not letting people come up. And that's what led to a lot of deaths, was second and third class just being locked literally to drown.
That is so unbelievably sad.
And so this is where things start happening quick. 1:15 a.m., boilers begin exploding. So because once water reached these hot boilers, obviously that heat and the cold water
it doesn't mix.
So they start exploding. The officers are, at this point, they start enforcing the lifeboat rules, getting as many people on, women and children first, whatever. It says shots are later fired in at least one scuffle. So it definitely got at least serious enough to where somebody had, somebody shot. 1:40 a.m. Most boats are leaving. Oh, sorry. The lifeboat rules must have been for women and children, because at 1:40 it says most boats are still leaving half full.
Okay.
Although the ship is now visibly listing, so it's taking on water. It's definitely going down at this point.
Okay.
By 2 a.m., the last of the regular lifeboats are launched. Again, half full.
Okay.
Then they have collapsible lifeboats that they apparently also started using. At that point, at 2 a.m., this is when the captain actually lets the crew, basically, he releases the crew, meaning that they're no longer obligated to do whatever job they're assigned. And basically, it's like every man for himself.
Okay.
Go save yourself, There are some accounts that do corroborate that the band did play all the way down. So there's a couple more interesting pieces of information too I'll share. At 2:18 a.m., that's when we're basically, it gets to the point where it actually breaks in half. It says stern briefly lifts out of the water, then quickly follows the bow downwards. We know that. By 2:20 a.m., the boat was completely underwater. And by this point, some of the lifeboats returned to look for survivors.
Mm-hmm.
They pulled 6 people out of the water, only 6 out of 1,500,
Wow.
over 1,500, and only one of them survived.
Out of the 6 that they pulled.
Yeah. Water was 28 degrees.
Oh my goodness.
And it says that most died within 15 minutes. It was so cold that you didn't even stand a chance. Like, unless somebody pulled you out of the water right away. And obviously, I can understand to a certain extent. Like, I could understand these people in these tiny little lifeboats with this giant ship sinking right next to them. They're like, let me get away from this thing before we somehow get ensnarled in the wreckage.
Right.
You know what I mean? So 705 survivors are rescued by the Carpathia. They're rescued from the lifeboats. And then she ends up on the
Yeah.
ocean floor in her final resting place. Now, the interesting thing is aside from the crew playing all the way down, the evidence now suggests with this new like digital scans that they've done that the crew in the engine rooms kept the boilers fired the entire time. So they were shoveling coal the entire time to make sure that the lights stay on so that it's easier for people to get off.
They knew.
They knew.
Oh
They
my
100%
gosh.
knew. They even have they were able to capture a picture of a valve, a steam valve in the boiler room that directs steam to the generators. So that means that obviously the generators were still running. And they have multiple accounts that basically say the light stayed on until she went down. So they stayed in there shoveling coal to make sure that whoever was trying to get off this boat was able to see, and
Yeah.
it wasn't utter chaos.
I wonder when it broke apart and the first half went down, if they are near each other, if they like sank near each other.
Well, so they ended up a good ways apart. I'm not sure exactly how far apart, but they're not like immediately right next to
Right.
each other, because obviously by the time they sank down I can't even remember how many feet it is, it's like 28,000 feet or something. By the time it sank down, they kind of drifted apart and both landed,
In
apart from
different
each
places,
other.
yeah.
But the interesting part is like when you look at the front section of it, and obviously everybody's seen the videos or the photos of the Titanic, and it's like it landed upright, into the silt and stand, and I'm sure there was more that was deposited next to it, but it landed upright instead of just like falling over or something like that. And it's kind of interesting that happened. I mean, I don't know if it's typical for shipwrecks to land upright on the ocean floor, but it was just kind of
I don't
interesting
know.
that it did. So the fun stuff. So we know what happened to the Titanic. We know how screwed up the whole story is. But what about the conspiracies?
Okay.
Dun, dun, dun. All right. So you might have heard a couple of these. You might not. I
Okay,
don't know.
go for it.
So the first theory that we're going to go over is that it wasn't the Titanic that sank. It was its sister ship, the Olympic.
Okay.
So the Olympic was ridiculously similar to the Titanic. Obviously, it was different enough to where you could tell them apart, but it was very similar. The thing that kind of makes people think that this may be a credible story is that the Olympic collided with another ship in 1911. So when it collided with the other ship, it did permanent damage. And by permanent damage, it doesn't mean that it wasn't, seaworthy anymore, but it had a permanent list to one side. So it whatever happened, it just screwed up the structure of the ship. Well, the Olympic was at fault in that accident where it collided with the other ship.
Okay.
So the White Star Line couldn't even get the insurance money on it. So the allegation is that they swished them. So they switched the ships just prior to sailing and let the Olympic basically go down so that they could get insurance
So
money.
what they're saying is purposely,
It was an insurance job.
hit the iceberg. and let
That's
all those people die for
that's
insurance purposes.
that's the theory. Um, so it's actually said that and I don't know. I'm reading this. I'm reading the details of this, so I'm learning with you. It's saying that the dimensions of the Titanic and the Olympic were almost identical, same layout, same design, same size. The one thing that they do point to though is they say that the Titanic and the Olympic did have different portals, a different number of portals on the side.
Okay.
When they look at the original pictures of the Titanic as it's being built and as it's being launched, it had a certain number of portals. Well, apparently the photos of it right before it set sail showed a different number of portholes. So they're like, well, hold on.
You're right.
Wait a
Doesn't
minute.
match.
There's an extra hole in this ship, or maybe one less, which is even more conspiracy. But so they say that the truth is that the hull number of the Titanic, which would have been stamped all over the parts of the ship as it's being built in the shipyard, the hull number was all over everything. Like the stuff that they recovered, whatever's being picked up off the ocean floor, they see that hull number indicating that it is the Titanic.
Okay.
People are trying to say that they could have switched those out, but how many times are you going to switch it out?
Far-fetched. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway,
So question.
yeah.
If that's true, let's say, where's the Titanic? Was
I don't
it just
know.
never built? Was it not a thing? Like,
Well, maybe it took the Olympics place. I don't know what happened to the Olympic though.
that's what I'm saying. Is like, did
I also remember,
ship of that size doesn't just
Yeah.
like disappear? You know what I mean? Like,
but I also remember hearing something about how this, and I obviously again, it's probably just a bullshit thing. I remember hearing that people did notice that the Titanic had a slight list, like the Olympic did.
list.
List, like where it leans.
Oh, okay.
So, obviously it could have just been more bullshit to push a conspiracy theory. Who knows? I don't know.
I mean, can you really tell?
I don't know. Conspiracy theorists, and here's the fun part about this is that people will outright lie just to push a conspiracy theory just because it's clickbait. It obviously it gets views. I don't believe any of these conspiracy theories. The only thing I do believe, and we'll get to at the end of this list, it's not a conspiracy, but it's some information that maybe somehow explains a little bit or kind of goes towards the story of what happened.
Okay.
The other conspiracy, this one everybody loves, is that JP Morgan purposely didn't board the Titanic because he orchestrated this whole thing, because he was trying to sink it with the people that were against him about the formation of the Federal Reserve Bank. There's
that one.
no evidence that suggests that he orchestrated any kind of a plot. He doesn't, and it even says like he was frequently changing his travel plans, so he was canceling stuff last minute all the time.
I think a lot of people fail to realize that executives of that caliber do just that.
Well, of course.
All
and
the
I mean,
time.
Anybody that's got that much money and can. It doesn't matter that he bought a $5,000
doesn't
ticket.
matter, exactly.
Like, he's not going to care.
You can cancel your flight an hour before and not go. Like, that's just something that happens and that they do.
Well, and apparently he had health issues. So he always had to cancel plans because he had whatever health issues and he didn't want to travel that day or the next or that week, whatever. So I don't buy that one. I also think that sinking an entire ship with 2,200 people on board just to kill 3 people is a really long way of doing it.
Right.
Like,
it's
if
a
you're
lot
just
of
trying
effort.
to kill 3 people, you could probably just kill 3 people and be done with it. You know what I mean?
But imagine how good he felt. I mean, not good as in like a sense of like
How lucky he felt.
he felt.
Of course.
Not being there.
There's stuff like that happens all the time. Like, Seth MacFarlane, the guy that created Family Guy, he was supposed to be on a plane. He was supposed to be on one of the planes on the morning of 9/11. And apparently the story goes he was drinking the night before, he was hungover, he missed his flight, and that flight never made it. So you never know. You just never know.
Yeah.
This one's fun. I've never actually heard this one before, so I'm just going to kind of read through it. So the claim is that the Titanic was carrying a cursed artifact, an Egyptian coffin lid known as the unlucky mummy, and that it doomed the ship.
Okay.
The artifact housed in the British Museum has long been blamed for causing misfortunes, deaths, and accidents. Rumors say it was being secretly transported to America by a wealthy collector and hidden in Titanic's cargo. Crew members allegedly felt uneasy around a certain crate. Some reports claim the mummy case wasn't listed on the manifest, fueling mystery.
Okay. Come on.
So apparently, the unlucky mummy is a thing. It's this mummy thing that they speak of is true, but it never left the British Museum. It's still there. There's no record of it ever being on the Titanic. No mummy was ever found in the wreck. It's just it's a baseless thing. So this one, I love this one. I there's been a few instances of stuff like this where I'm like, okay, time travel has to be real. 14 years prior, in 1898, Morgan Robertson writes a novel called Futility or the Wreck of the Titan. In this novel, there's a fictional ship called the Titan. It was the largest ship of its time. It was deemed unsinkable, and it hit an iceberg in April in the North Atlantic. Literally the story of the Titanic.
Wow.
It had too few lifeboats, was traveling at top speed, and had massive loss of life. Both Titan and the Titanic, so the one from his book, were about 800 feet long and hit an iceberg on the starboard side. I mean, how coincidental.
That's too much.
Like one coincidence, two, three.
Yeah, like all of them?
I mean, even down to the name being that similar, it's like, come on. And so the funny thing is so it's crazy because like everybody basically says, okay, it's just a hell of a coincidence. But it's, that's all it is.
That's too much of a coincidence.
But how many
There's too many
coincidences
details
can you
that
have?
match.
Yeah. The fact that it was, okay, look, I get it. You're going to say that it's a coincidence that a ship, the biggest ship of its time was called the Titan or the Titanic because it's so big. Great. But they were deemed unsinkable. They hit an iceberg in April in the North Atlantic on the starboard side, the size of the ship, that it had too few lifeboats, like every one of these things.
It's like check mark, check mark, check mark.
Yeah, that's a hell of a coincidence.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm surprised that nobody went and had a freaking
Was
word
this book
with
just
Morgan
on
Robertson.
that subject, or was it like a culmination of different things that he wrote about?
Well, it's called Futility or the Wreck of the Titan, so I'm guessing the book is about the Titan.
Interesting.
Which, I mean, I would love to get a copy of this book and just read it, because there's another book that's also eerily weird. I don't know too much of the details, so I don't want to get into it, but it's called The Last President.
Okay.
And it's about this kid named, I think his name was Barron Trump. And he has a mentor named Don.
Okay.
Who owns a business on Fifth Avenue in New York.
When was this written?
In like the 1800s. So it's like basically the story of Donald Trump, and it's called
I'd like to see the
Last
lineage
President.
there, because what if they had other barons and Donald Trumps back then?
I don't know, but
I'm sure they did.
It's just when you hear, and so I don't know all the details. Like I'm sure if I read the book, I'm like, oh, this is nothing like the real story.
Yeah.
But when you hear like those like little points, you're like, well, that's kind of an
weird.
odd,
Yeah.
And it's strange that all of these coincidental books happened like right around the same time, late 1800s, early 1900s. But what do I know? Okay, so moving away from the conspiracies. So I did this kind of in order of like what's more realistic.
Okay.
So like, the mummy, there really is a mummy, but it wasn't there. The thing about the novel, because the novel was real and this guy did write about all this stuff, and it's just a weird coincidence. He just guessed right like 8 times. So this last thing is not actually a conspiracy. It's truth, but it's not the reason that it sank.
Okay.
It can be part of the explanation as to why it sank so fast. And let's just get into it.
Okay.
So there was a coal fire on board the Titanic in one of the coal stores on the starboard side of the ship, there was a fire that started about 4 days before it set sail.
Okay.
Now the coal fire basically just smolders. It just sits there. It doesn't. It's not a freaking inferno with flames, whatever, right? So a fire in boiler room 6 was confirmed by crew testimony. It burned for days before departure. In 2017, photo analysis of Titanic's hull showed a dark vertical streak. It's interpreted as external heat damage.
Okay.
So where that coal store was and where that coal fire was where the ship got hit by that iceberg, and it was severe enough to where you can see a streak of different color from where that fire had been burning
Okay.
on the outside of the ship. So it was significant. Coal fires, it was saying, I was reading about this, they're not that rare for a ship to have a coal fire that they, will deal with as they're underway. I just don't know how significant this was, but it seems like it was significant if you could see it from the outside of the ship, right? So, they're saying that it could have been part of the reason that it was weaker in that spot. So it could have been that the iceberg caused more damage than it would have because of the prolonged exposure to heat having weakened the metal.
Possibility, but I mean, I think even if that weren't, or if that didn't happen, it still had no chance.
So yeah, well,
it
says. So here's what it's telling me. It says it almost certainly contributed to the structural failure of Titanic, although it didn't cause a sinking on its own. So it's a contributing factor. It was a contributing factor.
So you think that if that didn't happen,
they might have had a little bit more time,
maybe
to get another ship in the area to help out before people ended up in the water. Maybe the gash wouldn't have been as big, and it would have taken 4 or 5 hours to sink. I mean, it's obviously a million what ifs, but it's kind of interesting to think that there was something that we know 100% was a contributing factor to it. But back then, nobody really considered that to be serious enough to worry about it.
Yeah, because if it were now.
Well, I mean, if it were now, they'd decommission the ship until it's fully repaired and tested and all that stuff. But, it's good
we have all these rules now.
To an extent.
To an extent, yeah.
Obviously, some of them are dumb, like FAA rules where, I don't know if you've heard about this, where they'll have, let's say you're going to put a new seat on a plane, right? You can't just buy a seat and put it on there. It has to be an FAA certified seat. It doesn't matter if that seat is 100% similar to another one that's not FAA certified. If that seat doesn't go through that certification, it can't be put on a plane. And it just makes it cost like 10 times as much.
I'm wondering what the difference is.
The FAA looked at it and said, yes, you can. So that's one of those things where I'm saying, like, sometimes it's not a good thing.
So you're pretty much paying that much more money for an inspector.
Essentially, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm like, maybe there's a difference in the chair itself.
No. I'm telling you, you could take the same exact chair.
Gotcha.
Table, whatever. You name it. The same exact one that you would use somewhere else. And you try to put that on a plane and they're going to say, nope, it's not certified. So you can't use it. Sorry.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, that's where it's like, it's not overreach, but it's just, it's unnecessary.
Yeah.
Certain things like that. Like, I could understand if you're talking about the pilot's seat. But then it's like, well, if you have like a little folding table in the back on a private jet, like who the fuck cares?
Yeah.
Like, who cares, really? I mean, what's the difference?
As long as it's stuck to the plane.
As long as it's not going to go flying around.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. It's not going to break off. So cool. Or for that matter, if it's a private jet, like, what is it to you? You don't come and check the seats that are installed in my car if I swap them out for different seats. So
seats, though? That's crazy.
Everything.
That's crazy.
Fucking flush handles on a toilet. Like, everything is just 20 times the price because it's FAA certified.
What a good business they have.
They have a nice racket. They really do. I would love to be like a company that just FAA certifies stuff. Like, bring it to me. I will FAA certify. I wish I knew how to get into this kind of thing because you probably make a fortune.
Oh, yeah.
It's probably insane. But anyway.
Well, that was interesting.
So that was our little brief overview of the Titanic. At one point, this was way, way, way back in the day. I want to say I was probably like 7th grade or something. IMAX wasn't a thing outside of like the California Science Center.
Okay.
The California Science Center had an IMAX, or was it the California Science Museum? Whatever, I don't know. They had an IMAX theater there, and they had only like a couple of movies because nobody was filming in IMAX at the time because it was just super stupid expensive. One of their movies was like a space thing.
Okay.
Another one of their movies was about the Titanic. And I remember watching this in IMAX, and I was like, this is freaking amazing. And I think that's actually what sparked my interest in the Titanic, because like I don't think I'd heard about it before then.
Did you go and see the actual movie in theaters?
The Titanic?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How many times did you go?
Once.
I went 9 times.
That's not normal.
9. I was in love with Leonardo DiCaprio.
So I actually wonder if there was any basis to that love story.
Probably not. But they always have to add that in for like some kind of...
Well, yeah, but I wonder if they were like, if they found like a journal or something where it was like...
I don't know. I mean, nothing like that has been spoken of that I've heard. So I think it was just a really tragic story, and they had to put some kind of love story in there to make it more relatable, to make it more emotional. Not that it wasn't emotional enough, you know what I mean?
To make it more Hollywood.
Yeah. So...
well, you remember like that movie that came out, what was it, like 5 years ago about the Armenian genocide, where it was more of a love story than anything else? And I'm like, not everything has to be a love story.
It's
You
just
depict
I mean,
the
if they really talk about the Armenian genocide, if they really make a movie about that, it's
wouldn't be able to
gut wrenching. Like,
well, they wouldn't
they
be
couldn't.
able to release it.
Yeah.
I don't think. I mean, it's like the same. Like, you don't see movies that are factual about the Holocaust either. Like,
They
they're
always
not gonna have.
it's always like a story
There has to
that
be.
represents what has happened.
It's like that's
But it's
the
always
background.
but like half of it is like something else that kind of grabs your attention. Not not that
Yeah,
the other
there's-
stuff doesn't grab your attention, but like something else that kind of pulls more at your heartstrings, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm explaining it correctly.
they have a love story typically.
Yeah.
That's the foreground story. The background story is this tragic event like the
Yeah.
Titanic or a genocide or whatever,
Yeah.
or the Holocaust. And yeah, they'll depict how screwed up that was. But your main focus, because that's the way they steer
Yeah.
it, is the
Because
two main characters.
you also have to think about it. They want their audience to fall in love with the characters.
Of course.
They want to
they gotta be
sell
invested.
merchandise.
Yeah.
You know, they want to have people come back. They want to have a certain heartthrob, right? Like,
Well, and I don't think it's just
this is
that
what
either.
they
I think
do.
it's mostly about the fact that like you couldn't make a movie about the Titanic and just have the camera follow around a bunch of random people.
exactly. There has to be
an
another
anchor.
story
Yeah.
in line with what happened.
Exactly.
You know, so to make it's a movie.
Yeah, you have to have your anchor characters because I mean, otherwise, what is it? They're just following random people dancing and eating and
Exactly.
and then all of a sudden everybody dies. Like that doesn't make any
Exactly.
sense.
Yeah.
So,
But no, it was a fantastic movie. I didn't know the depth of it, because we were so
it
young
was
when
very
it came
deep.
when we came out.
It's like one of the deepest parts of the ocean.
Yeah, when
I'm
really,
kidding.
but now looking back on it, it's I don't know, it's absolutely heartbreaking. And
Well, and the screwed up part was like when we saw that Titanic exhibit in Vegas, like when you looked at the names and you realized, especially as you're going through, how they give you that ticket
Yeah.
where you got to like see if you survived.
survived. Yeah,
And the crazy part is like you see the names of the survivors and the names of those that were never found and obviously perished. It was crazy because it was always like there was a woman or a child that survived and her husband didn't.
I know.
And it was just over and over and over again. And how many families were like just ripped apart.
Right?
in
How
one
many
night,
people this
you know?
affected?
People that were hoping for a new life in America that literally probably sold everything they had and
Just to afford that ticket.
just to afford that ticket in whatever shitty third class or steerage or whatever you want to call it
Accommodations that they were giving them.
with the rats, and they ended up drowning to their death in a fucking cage because people wouldn't let them. At least
I can't
listen,
even imagine.
they weren't going to
like,
make it
that's-
regardless, right? Open the gates, let them out, let them just let them try, give them a fighting chance.
How can just being a crew member on board and locking people in an area knowing that the ship is sinking, how are you able to live with yourself? Like,
Well,
like at that point, I don't care about that job. Like,
yes,
I'm in it for the
but
humanity aspect of it. Like, I'm going to save as much people as I can. If I'm locking people away, why am I going to do that?
You got to also remember too,
You know?
though, is people follow orders.
Not in that situation. Like, have a brain.
People
People are literally dying.
People followed orders in 1915 in Armenia. People followed orders in World War II in Germany.
I know.
So they just follow orders.
I know. Good point. Good point.
That's all. You have an authority figure.
People are following orders
yeah.
now too. So
yeah, you have an authority figure telling
Yep.
you what to do, and you got it in your head that that's what you're supposed to do. And done deal.
Anyway,
Unfortunately,
well, good talk.
good talk. That was probably quick. I don't know how long that was episode, but thanks for sticking it out. Maybe we'll have some more random interesting stories. Maybe I'll actually start talking about some of the stuff I'm passionate about, like the weird space stuff and all that kind of stuff.
You should. You're really into that.
I'm not that into it anymore. And the problem is with like stuff like space is that so much changes as technology develops that I feel like I was left behind probably like 20 years ago. Like I could have told you like it still boggles my mind when people are like, yeah, Pluto's not a planet anymore. And I'm like, fuck, that's right.
No, but it is.
But but it's not. Technically, it's
No,
not.
it's
That's the
technically
thing.
not, but come on.
But to me, I'm like, yeah, Pluto is a planet.
Yeah,
when
that's
people
what we
are
grew
like,
up knowing. Like
8 planets.
being
Like,
taught.
what do you mean? There's 9. I don't.
Yeah.
Where do you?
Like why?
Like why did you just demote Pluto?
Seriously,
like,
what
did
did Pluto do to you?
Seriously.
Ugh, whatever.
Anyhow, all right.
Anyway, thank you guys for joining. We hope we hope that you like this episode. Please follow, like, and share. And we hope to see you next time.
I'm gonna ask for a favor. Let us know what you like better.
Yeah.
More history or events and fact-based stuff, or do you want to just hear us rant and rave and just be stupid? Let us know in the comments. And thanks for watching.
All right. Till next time.
Till next time.
Bye.